do you want to talk about next?
Honestly, I think we should probably talk about. I think we should talk about. Like, where's that coming from? It's like, okay, so this is the problem. Every time, can we write the word down here? The word is sex. S-E-X. No, seriously, sex. See, this is the problem. It's super easy to. Why can't I say? All right, it's normal, everyone. This is why we have to talk about it. It's a normal thing about everyone came from this word. Man. Every time I think we should talk about doesn't let me talk about. Can we fix that? I found that there are two very sensitive topics amongst adults that all adults somewhat engage in, usually in some aspect or another, but not many people read about or educate themselves more on. And one is sexuality, the other one is parenting, right? And the difficult thing about those two topics, when you say the word parenting, you sound, I don't know, like you are in a morally good place. I want to be a better parent. We should be better parents. There's this aspect of it that sounds like socially acceptable, but talking about sex, it's very like undercovers. We don't want to talk about it, that kind of thing. But going within the room, I find that there's this equal difficulty in working on those two topics because we have this desire to just be good at it. Regardless of our upbringing, regardless of any education, like I just want to be good at that. We don't have that same expectation on other things. If I were to ask someone on the street, like, are you a dentist? No. Can you look at my teeth and tell me if I have a cavity? They're like, no, I don't know this field. They don't have this like moral, like I'm a bad person because I don't know how like teeth work. They just don't have that understanding. But if I ask someone like, are they a good parent? Just because they are a parent, they need to feel like they're a good parent. Just because they are having sex, they need to feel like they're a good sexual person or they have this sexual chemistry. And that desire to just be good prevents us from being better. I just want to be good. And so I stopped trying to be better. So whether it's in parenting or whether it's in sex, I think being able to talk about it without necessarily feeling judgment either on the other person or shameful on ourselves, just knowing that this is an important part of humanity. Both parenting and sex, ironically, one comes from before the other. Those things are natural and they need to be discussed. They need to be talked about without shame, with more understanding, because people have different levels of sex drives. In the same way, some people are more natural at picking up a child when they, when they're on the ground. Some people are like, I don't know what to do with this kid. And other people are like that, I don't know what to do in this bed, or I don't know how to approach the situation. And the only way things are going to get any better is if we can talk about it. And so that feeling that being a bad parent means that you're a bad person. When you think you're a bad dentist, you don't think you're a bad person. Or if you're thinking that you're not as great at, a bad lover is a bad man or a bad woman, like you're not, like you're morally qualified by this skill. And the truth is, that's what prevents us from talking about it. That's what prevents us from educating ourselves more on it and having like better discussions. Because it's not talked about enough, it's often one of the bigger problems. It's hard to say whether I feel like they have the issues. They don't always say it. That's usually not like the first thing that they talk about. Part of the reason it's not the first thing to talk about is because even though they're coming into therapy to talk about the difficult things, that's still like the last thing I want to say. It's a lot easier to say, I don't know if I can trust them with the cell phone, or I don't know if, because we don't want to address the sexual aspect of things. And I think even in our private lives, we may not truly come to grips with like our own sexuality, our own needs and desires, because we're afraid of being shamed, or we're afraid of being rejected by even the person who's most intimate with us, who's closest to us. If we start to shift in sexuality, whether we want it more or less, there becomes this pressure. The person who wants it more may feel shameful for like always wanting it. Oh, what do you mean you always want it? Like you're always, and there's this like shame aspect of like, like you dog, or this like just humping everything, that kind of thing. And at the same time, the person who wants it less, it's like, well, what kind of human are you? How do you not want this? And if they may have a different sex drive, that's just what we have to recognize. And sometimes things adjust and change, after kids are born. Sometimes that adjusts, like the frequency, intensity of all that kind of stuff. And if we don't talk about it, then it's always going to be an issue. So within therapy, even though not everyone starts with that topic, I can often feel that this may be something that will come out later on. Yeah. We deal with these other things, and then later on it's like, by the way, when it comes to our sex life, there's like this little thing that I don't like, or I really like all of these things except for like this one thing. And most of the time they're afraid to express it. Right. And the world teaches us to be private about it and to not talk about it. And the people who do, it's like, oh, you this word and you that word. So for myself, even though I'm a professional, and even if you're going to, let's say, a specific like sex therapist, or if you're going with the intention of having this conversation about sex, you still have this, who's this guy? And how are we going to talk about our most, I don't even talk about this with him or her. Right. Now we're supposed to talk about it with this other person in the room, and it's got to be super intimidating. And so that's why I never like start off this conversation with like, so what's going on with sex? Right. Just because sometimes people need to feel more comfortable. Right. But at the same time, I never want to shy away from the topic. Sex. I have to use some of these terms so that people can recognize, hey, we can talk about this. At times people don't like to curse in the room with me. Mm-hmm. And, I have to curse, and I'll say, fuck this or this, that, or shit or whatever. I'm not trying to insult anyone, but I want people to feel comfortable in expressing themselves how they express themselves. Right. So that, I don't curse at the clients. I don't like to say like F you or anything like that. But I do want people to feel more at home or more comfortable in having these conversations, to allow for healthy space for them to have these deeper conversations. If they can't curse, then they may not talk about sex. They may not talk about the hard things because they're already limiting their language. I would recommend everyone to see a therapist, first of all. Similar to what I said before, when I'm working with just a couple, there's this really interesting dynamic behind the entity of one person and the background and the upbringing, the values, the traditions, everything, multiplied by the values, traditions, and backgrounds of this other person, and how those two worlds are merging, right? But then you add this like third, this child, and now it's another relationship into that dynamic where, parents often feel like I need to give everything to my child. My child has to have all of my time, and then they can often neglect the relationship that brought them that child. And maybe going on a date night, especially when having a newborn, will feel wrong. Like, oh, how could I leave my child in the care of anyone else? I'm a bad mom, I'm a bad parent, or a bad dad, or whatever the case may be. That is a very tricky tightrope to navigate. And I would say every couple that goes through that could use a professional to help them navigate through that, because one misstep that has nothing to do with a lack of love, it has nothing to do with the lack of care or desire for the other person, just a miscommunication, especially in regards to this new entity that exists in the world now. And people can start this pattern of like either creating more distance between it, oh, she's always with the baby, and so I'm just going to not talk to her about the fact that I'm horny. I'm just going to not even waste the time because I've learned that she's not in the mood. It doesn't change the fact that I have this drive and I have this desire. So I've just learned to not communicate it. I've just learned. And out of what? Out of love for our child. It's not out of like wanting to seek anything elsewhere. It's just this dynamic that we're not prepared for it. We didn't know how it was going to go. It's unexpected. So making sure that couples continuously like check in with their needs. Obviously the aspects of parenting are important, but the aspects of being parents is important.
Right. I think if you have a child and going to therapy almost normalizes it, like especially for the child to grow up and say, this is normal to be able to talk about your feelings and express them because they're seeing the parents do it.
Yes, absolutely. I think parents and family members that go to therapy, not that they have to express all of the fine details of therapy, but letting people in your family, especially your children, know that you've gone to therapy, that it's a positive example of what can happen if they struggle. If they're in their teenage years and they know like Dr. What's-It-So or Fernando Campos, whatever, it's more normalized for them. It helps remove that stigma. So ideally, having that conversation when things aren't an issue, when you don't have like the emotional turmoil to have like some of these heavy discussions, because they're heavy no matter what. It'd be easier to have that conversation once a month, once a year, just having someone that you can talk to about those things versus waiting for like the explosion, waiting for, well, let's see how long we last without going crazy, or without, hurting each other. And most of the times it's far gone before people say, okay, like we need to go and get some. I highly recommend couples, whether they're in the couple or if they're separated or if they're single, whatever it is. I think it's important to have a value-oriented life rather than, let's say, a goal-oriented life. Some people focus on, I want to get a husband, I want to get a wife, because they assume that they will be loved. But focusing more on, I want to find love and be in love, or I want to find connection, I want to embrace community. Sometimes you find these things outside of relationship. Sometimes you want to feel, love, obviously romantically, but you can feel love socially in other aspects as well. But recognizing what our values are, the expectations we have of other people. And I think another huge facet of this romantic aspect of couples counseling is how we engage with our friendships. Sometimes we will consider ourselves an amazing friend, and then we put the expectations of what we would do, and this is always stated. If I was in a situation, I wouldn't do that. Or if I was in a situation, I would do that. If she asked me to borrow $40, I would give it to her. If they asked me to drop them off at the airport, I would do that for them. And we get insulted because we put ourselves in like that narrative of like, if we were them, right. But that's us. Now, what would they do? How do they respond? And are we putting them at a level of responsibility that they either A, never asked for, or B, weren't prepared for? Some people ask for a certain level of responsibility and they just aren't able to do that. Recognizing those things faster helps us to not have so much anger and hate and all these kinds of emotions that help cloud our judgment in the way we approach things,